Imagine you are handed one of the hardest decisions in the world right now. You are running a country of 1.5 billion people. Artificial intelligence has arrived, and it could lift hundreds of millions of your citizens, or it could quietly grind them down. And every other major power is shouting a different answer at you about what to do. What do you choose? This is not a thought experiment. This is the actual live dilemma sitting on the desk of the Indian government. And in late 2025, India finally gave its answer. A distinctive, deliberate, and genuinely fascinating answer. And it looks nothing like what the West did. So today I want to walk you through India's bet. The specific gamble it is making on how to govern artificial intelligence, why it deliberately refused to copy Europe, and whether this quiet third path might just be the model that much of the world ends up following. To understand the choice, you first have to feel the trap. Because every government trying to regulate AI is caught between two walls, and both of them are painful. On one wall, you have the danger of doing too little. Let AI run wild with no rules at all, and you invite the whole catalog of harms. Biased systems denying people loans and jobs. Opaque algorithms making life-changing calls with nobody accountable. Deepfakes and misinformation tearing at the social fabric. A completely hands-off approach is how ordinary people get hurt, quietly, at enormous scale. But on the other wall is the opposite danger, doing too much. Slam down a giant, heavy, complicated rulebook, and you can strangle the very thing you're trying to nurture. Your startups drown in paperwork before they ever build anything. Investment flees to friendlier countries, and you end up regulating an industry you never actually managed to grow. You get all of the caution and none of the innovation. So that is the trap. Too little and people get hurt. Too much and progress dies in the cradle. Every single country on earth is somewhere on that tightrope right now, trying not to fall off either side. And the world's most famous answer so far is Europe's. The European Union built a large, detailed, legally binding law sorting AI by risk and imposing hard obligations with very large fines behind it. It is the strict approach, comprehensive, prescriptive, rules first. Now, plenty of people admire that, but for a country in India's exact position, simply photocopying the European model would have been a serious mistake, and it is worth understanding precisely why. Because India is not Europe, and its situation is genuinely different in three enormous ways. First, the sheer scale and diversity. India is not one market. It is a subcontinent of dozens of languages, staggering economic range, and more than 1 billion people, many just coming online for the first time. A rigid one-size-fits-all rulebook designed for wealthy, mature European economies simply does not map onto that reality. Second, the stage of the journey. Europe is largely trying to govern an AI industry. It mostly imports. India is trying to build one. It has a booming technology sector, a vast pool of engineering talent, and genuine ambitions to be a global AI power, not just a consumer of everyone else's models. When you are still trying to grow the tree, you are far more careful about how hard you prune it. And third, the opportunity. For India, AI is not just a risk to be managed. It is arguably the single greatest tool available for leapfrogging old problems. Delivering healthcare to villages with no doctors. Bringing education and government services to people in their own language. Pulling millions into the formal economy. Choke that off with premature red tape, and you are not just slowing an industry. You may be denying a better life to hundreds of millions of people. And this is not abstract. Picture a farmer in rural India who does not read English, pointing a cheap phone at a diseased crop and getting an answer, spoken back in their own language, that might save the season. Picture a first-generation student in a small town getting patient, personal tutoring no school could ever afford to give them. Picture government schemes, long tangled in paperwork and middlemen, finally reaching the people they were meant for. That is the upside India is desperate not to smother. For a wealthy nation, over-regulating AI costs some growth. For India, getting it wrong could cost a generation its shot at a better life. So when you hold all of that together, a heavy, punitive, Europe-style law starts to look less like caution and more like a self-inflicted wound. India needed a different instrument. And in November of 2025, its Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, the body known as MeitY, published exactly that. A document called the India AI Governance Guidelines. And this did not appear out of nowhere. It grew out of the wider India AI mission, the country's big national push to build up its own AI capacity, from computing power to talent to data. A dedicated expert committee was convened in the middle of 2025, spent months consulting, and produced these guidelines as the result. So this is not an off-the-cuff press release. It is a deliberate, considered attempt to write down how the world's most populous country intends to live with artificial intelligence. And notice immediately the most important word in that title: guidelines, not act, not law, not code of statutes. From the very first word, India signaled that it was choosing a fundamentally different path. Softer on its face, but, as we will see, cleverer than it first appears. The whole philosophy rests on a single, repeated idea: that you do not have to choose between innovation and safety, that the two are not enemies but partners. The stated goal is to enable rapid, widespread adoption of AI while building trust and accountability alongside it, rather than bolting them on afterward as a cage. Innovation and safety growing together. That is the bet. Now, a framework is only as good as its foundations, and India laid its foundations as a set of guiding principles, 7 of them. They are sometimes called the 7 Sutras, an old word for a thread, or an aphorism, a compact rule to hang a whole philosophy on. And they are worth hearing because together they are a portrait of the kind of AI India says it wants. The first sutra is trust, the idea that trust is the foundation everything else is built on. Without public trust, AI adoption simply stalls, so trust is treated not as a nice to have, but as the bedrock. The second is people first, that AI should be human-centric, keeping people in control, augmenting human beings rather than sidelining them. The technology serves the citizen, not the other way around. The third is the one that reveals the whole strategy: innovation over restraint, a deliberate, explicit tilt of the scales. When innovation and caution genuinely conflict, the default leans toward letting things be built. That single phrase is India planting its flag, choosing growth on purpose. The fourth sutra is fairness and equity, that AI should not entrench existing bias or discrimination, and its benefits should reach everyone, not just a privileged few. In a country as unequal and diverse as India, that is not a small ambition. The fifth is accountability. That responsibility must sit somewhere. When an AI system causes harm, there has to be a human or an organization who answers for it. The machine can never be the place the buck stops. The sixth is understandable by design, a cousin of transparency. That these systems should be explainable, not impenetrable black boxes, so that decisions can be examined and questioned rather than simply obeyed. And the seventh sutra is safety, resilience, and sustainability. That AI should be safe and secure across its whole life, robust against misuse, and mindful of its wider footprint, including the very real environmental cost of all this computing power. So there is the soul of it: trust, people first, innovation over restraint, fairness, accountability, understandable by design, safety. Read them together and you get the flavor of the whole approach. Serious about harm, but leaning always toward building. But here is the crucial question, and it is the one skeptics rightly ask. Principles are easy. Anyone can write a list of nice words. Nations produce beautiful, high-minded declarations about technology all the time, and most of them gather dust. So what stops these 7 sutras from being just another poster on a government wall? What actually makes them bite? And this is where the framework gets more interesting than it first looks. Because underneath the lofty principles sits real machinery. India did not just publish values. It laid out how it intends to govern, across 6 concrete pillars, the load-bearing columns of the whole structure. Run through them quickly, because together they show this is a system, not a slogan. The first pillar is infrastructure, building the actual compute, data, and shared resources a homegrown AI industry needs. The second is capacity building, growing the skills and talent so the country can wield this technology rather than just import it. The third is policy and regulation, the rules themselves kept deliberately light. The fourth is risk mitigation, the safety machinery for spotting and containing harm. The fifth is accountability, making sure responsibility always lands somewhere real. And the sixth is institutions, the actual bodies and coordination needed to keep the whole thing running and to steer it as it evolves. Notice something in that list. Two of the six pillars, infrastructure and capacity building, are not about restraint at all, they are about building. Right there in the governance framework, how the foundation is dedicated to helping AI grow, not just fencing it in. That is India telling you, in the very architecture of its plan, that this is a growth strategy first and a rule book second. Now let us pull out the specific mechanisms, because they are the difference between a wish and a system. The first piece of real machinery is the idea of compliance by design. Rather than catching harms after they happen and punishing them, the aim is to bake safety and legal compliance into AI systems from the very start. Build it right at the source. It is a quiet but important shift from punishment after the fact to prevention up front. The second, and for our purposes the most important, is the embrace of voluntary codes of practice and, crucially, algorithmic audits. Sit with that. This principle, first, innovation-friendly framework still lands squarely on the audit. On the idea that these systems must be examinable, testable, checkable. Even the country most determined not to over-regulate cannot escape the conclusion that if AI is going to make decisions about people, someone has to be able to look inside and check that it is fair. The third mechanism is genuinely forward-thinking. India laid out the plan for a national AI incident database, a central place to systematically report and track it when AI systems fail or cause harm. Think of how aviation became astonishingly safe. Not by assuming planes would never crash, but by rigorously investigating every incident and learning from each one. India is proposing to bring that same discipline to artificial intelligence, treat failures as data, learn out loud, get safer over time. And the fourth piece ties it together, a risk-based approach. Echoing the smarter instinct in Europe's law, but applied with a lighter touch, India intends to match the level of oversight to the level of danger. A trivial, low-stakes AI is left alone to flourish. A high-stakes system that touches people's rights and livelihoods draws real scrutiny. The roue is bent to the risk instead of crushing everything with the same weight. And here is a clever part of the strategy that is easy to miss. India is not starting from a blank page, and it knows it. Rather than write one giant new AI law, the guidelines lean on the laws the country already has. A recent and serious data protection law governs how personal data can be used. Existing technology and information laws already reach a lot of online harms. So the approach is, first, use and sharpen the tools you already own and only reach for brand new AI-specific law where there is a genuine gap. It is a way of governing quickly, without waiting years for some single perfect statute that might never come. There is one harm, though, that India cannot afford to treat gently, and the framework knows it: deepfakes and synthetic media. In a country of this scale and diversity, with high-stakes elections and hundreds of millions of people newly online, AI-generated lies are not a nuisance. They are a threat to social peace itself. So alongside the gentle pro-innovation tone, there is a harder edge here, a push toward what are sometimes called techno-legal measures. Things like labeling and watermarking AI-generated content so that people stand a fighting chance of knowing what is real. On misinformation, the velvet glove comes off. So look at what has actually been built here. A set of 7 human-centered principles, yes. But underneath them, compliance by design, algorithmic audits, an incident reporting system, and risk-based oversight. That is not a poster. That is the skeleton of a real governance system, deliberately kept flexible. And I want to be honest about the risks of this path, because it is a genuine gamble, not a sure thing. The single biggest danger of the guidelines approach is right there in the word. Guidelines, they are, for now, largely voluntary, softer. without the hard binding force and the terrifying fines of the European law. So the obvious worry is teeth. Will companies actually follow a set of principles and voluntary codes when the law is not truly forcing them to? Or will the well meaning framework simply be ignored by anyone whose profits depend on ignoring it? A guideline that everyone quietly disregards is worse than useless because it creates the comfortable illusion of safety without the substance. That is the real risk India is running. But there is a serious argument on the other side, and it is why this might just be brilliant rather than naive. The bet is that by starting collaborative and flexible rather than adversarial and rigid, India can move fast, build trust with the industry it is trying to grow, and tighten the rules gradually as it learns what actually works. Start light, watch closely. Harden the framework where the real harms turn out to be, guided by that incident database, instead of guessing at everything up front and freezing the whole industry in place. And India holds a card that most countries writing voluntary codes do not. Its market. Access to more than 1 billion consumers is something no global technology company can casually shrug off. So even a guideline that carries no formal fine still carries real weight. Because the government issuing it controls the door to one of the largest markets on earth. Voluntary, when you are the size of India, is never quite as toothless as it sounds. That is the quiet leverage sitting underneath the polite language. And it helps to see the whole world lined up. Put the three big approaches side by side. The United States, so far, has mostly stood back with no comprehensive federal law, trusting the market and the courts to sort it out. Europe has built the cage, a heavy binding prescriptive law with enormous fines. And India is threading between them a principle-led, guidelines-first path that leans toward growth while quietly keeping the tools to tighten its grip. Three of the largest powers on earth, three genuinely different bets, all being placed at the same moment. We are right now running the greatest natural experiment in technology governance the world has ever seen. It is, in a sense, the difference between two philosophies of parenting, a powerful, unpredictable young thing. Europe has built strict walls and firm rules from day one. India is choosing to guide, to watch, to keep the trust, and to intervene hard only where it truly must. Nobody yet knows which parent is right. That is precisely what makes this the most interesting experiment in AI governance happening anywhere in the world. And that is really why this matters far beyond India's borders. Because the vast majority of the world is not Europe and is not the United States. Most countries are developing economies, hungry for the growth AI could bring, wary of rules that might strangle it, and utterly unable to afford the harms of getting it wrong. For every one of them, India is the far more relevant test case. If a nation of 1 billion+ people can genuinely thread this needle, growing a world-class AI industry while keeping it accountable, that becomes the template the whole global majority may reach for. So step back and take in the full shape of it. A country caught in the universal trap, too little regulation on one side, too much on the other. A deliberate refusal to simply copy Europe, rooted in India's own scale, ambition, and stage of growth. A choice of guidelines over hard law, resting on 7 human-centered principles. And underneath them, real machinery, audits, incident reporting, compliance by design, risk-based oversight to stop the principles from being empty. Whether it works, nobody yet knows. The teeth may prove too soft. Or the flexibility may prove to be exactly the wisdom a fast-moving technology demands. But make no mistake, this is one of the most important experiments on the planet. So what should you actually watch for now that you know the shape of the bet? Watch whether that incident database gets built for real and whether anyone acts on what it finds. Watch whether the voluntary codes attract genuine buy-in or polite indifference. Watch whether India, having started soft, actually finds the nerve to harden the rules when a serious harm arrives, because that first real test will tell you everything about whether the fence has any strength in it. And watch who copies India, because if this works, a great many countries will. Because everyone agrees, by now, that artificial intelligence has to be watched, checked, and held to account. The audit, in one form or another, has won that argument everywhere. The only question left is how. Whether you build the cage first and grow the animal inside it, or grow the animal first and build the fence as you learn its real shape. Europe chose the cage. India is betting on the fence. And a very large part of the world is quietly watching to see who was right.